It began near a centuries-old stone temple, a relic of the past, now caught in the violence of the present. A stretch of land where the history of colonial cartography still casts shadows over national pride, military posture, and the limits of restraint. In the early hours of the morning, before the sun had risen over the forested ridges of the Dangrek Mountains, artillery fire pierced the silence. Within hours, civilians were running, buildings were burning, and two national armies were exchanging heavy fire along a contested frontier that has never fully healed since the Age of Empire. The flashpoint was a familiar one, an ancient temple site, sacred to both Thais and Cambodians, perched along a border that was once drawn by French colonial surveyors over 100 years ago. That line, faint on paper, remains sharp on the ground. Both governments accuse the other of starting the conflict. Thai officials say Cambodian rocket launchers struck civilian targets, including a petrol station and a 7-Eleven store near the coastal province of Chanthaburi. Cambodian officials insist their actions are retaliatory, claiming that Thailand's military bombed their forward positions, first using F-16 fighter jets. The casualty count is rising. Thai authorities report that at least 12 civilians are confirmed dead. One child, just 8 years old, was among the victims. Cambodia has yet to release its own numbers. What began as a skirmish is now evolving into a broader military confrontation. Thailand has sealed its entire land border with Cambodia, a stretch of over 500 miles, cutting off trade, migration, and humanitarian passage. The last time such a total closure occurred, the region was still reeling from Cold War instability. Now, the fear is of a new era of regional fragmentation. Thailand's Air Force has carried out bombing raids on Cambodian military outposts. In turn, Cambodia has launched direct attacks on Thai military bases in the provinces of Surin and Sisaket. The images filtering out from the region are grim. Civilians huddling in evacuation shelters, hospitals being cleared out under artillery threat, gunfire echoing across paddy fields and roads mined decades ago, and possibly mined again. Thailand accuses Cambodian forces of planting new landmines along border trails. Cambodia denies the charge, stating that the millions of mines already scattered across the frontier are remnants of past conflicts, not new deployments. But in a region where a single misstep can take a limb, the distinction carries little comfort. The strategic imbalance between the two countries is stark. Thailand's military is more than 3 times the size of Cambodia's, with one of the most advanced air forces in Southeast Asia. It maintains an arsenal of modern multi-role fighter jets, mobile artillery, and a reserve force trained to scale quickly. Cambodia, in contrast, has no combat air force of its own. Its military remains reliant on ground forces, legacy equipment, and irregular militia units. But in asymmetric warfare, weakness can become leverage, especially when fighting occurs in dense terrain, among civilians, and under political pressure. And political pressure is precisely what is now pushing this confrontation deeper into instability. In Bangkok, the government is fractured. Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra was suspended just weeks before the first exchange of fire, after a leaked phone call surfaced between her and former Cambodian leader Hun Sen. In the recording, she referred to him as uncle, praised his leadership, and appeared to criticize Thailand's own military command. The fallout was immediate. Nationalist protests erupted across the capital, accusing the prime minister of undermining national sovereignty and bowing to a foreign strongman. Her political opponents, already emboldened by her family's controversial dynastic legacy, seized the moment. Thailand's military establishment, deeply entwined with the monarchy and historically wary of the Shinawatra lineage, viewed the call as a betrayal. The conflict on the border suddenly became more than a territorial dispute. It became a test of internal legitimacy, of how far the Thai state was willing to go to reassert control over both the frontier and the narrative. The Thai public, though weary of war, has shown signs of coalescing around a harder line. Footage of destroyed homes and civilian deaths has been used by nationalist media to frame Cambodia as the aggressor, even as the government insists its actions are purely defensive. At street level, opinion remains divided. Some call for de-escalation. Others echo a different sentiment. If Thailand does not retaliate, they will think we are weak. That is the line voiced by a resident in Surin province, just miles from the impact zone, as he held his child close. This is the danger of war, born not only from geography, but from wounded pride. To understand how it reached this point requires looking backward, not just days or weeks, but centuries. The roots of this conflict are not new. They were planted in the early 20th century when the Kingdom of Siam, today's Thailand, negotiated its borders with French Indochina, the colonial empire that encompassed modern-day Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. The maps drawn by colonial hands were often vague, symbolic, and deeply flawed. The Preah Vihear Temple, the sacred structure at the heart of the current violence, was one of the most contested sites. Built during the height of the Khmer Empire, it sits atop a steep cliff that looks into Cambodian territory, but is only accessible from the Thai side. In 1962, the International Court of Justice ruled that the temple belonged to Cambodia. Thailand accepted the ruling, but never fully abandoned its claim to the surrounding land. That legal wound has remained inflamed for decades, periodically erupting into border clashes, diplomatic spats, and nationalistic rhetoric. In 2011, fighting near the temple left more than a dozen soldiers dead and forced tens of thousands of civilians to evacuate. The United Nations intervened then, urging both sides to withdraw troops and establish a demilitarized zone. But memories fade, and demarcations erode. What we are witnessing now is not an isolated flare-up. It is part of a larger pattern, a pattern of unresolved historical tension, volatile domestic politics, and fragile regional institutions. In moments like this, regional frameworks are tested. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN has called for calm, issued statements of concern, and reaffirmed its principle of non-interference. But concern is not intervention, and statements do not stop artillery shells. Thailand and Cambodia are both ASEAN members, yet the regional bloc remains structurally unequipped to handle open hostilities between its own. The Charter offers no enforcement mechanism, no peacekeeping capacity, and no authority to mediate beyond persuasion. This has long been ASEAN's paradox. It seeks to unify Southeast Asia, yet it avoids entanglement in internal disputes. That policy of neutrality, while stabilizing in theory, often renders the organization inert when real conflict arises. The United Nations has also been drawn into the periphery of this crisis. Cambodia has formally requested an Emergency Security Council session, accusing Thailand of launching a campaign of what it terms brutal and barbaric aggression. Thailand, in response, insists its actions fall squarely within the framework of national self-defense. Its military doctrine permits cross-border strikes if threats are deemed imminent or ongoing. And, in this case, Bangkok claims that Cambodia's use of civilian zones for rocket launchers and artillery batteries constitutes such a threat. This legal framing the right to self-defense versus the limits of proportionality is a familiar fault line in modern conflict. But in Southeast Asia, such disputes are rarely litigated through international law. They are resolved through leverage, geography, and strategic patience. That is why Thailand's next moves are critical. Its advantage in air power, armor, and logistical reach makes it the dominant force on paper. But the political environment in Bangkok is anything but stable. Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra remains suspended. The interim government, dominated by military loyalists and conservative factions, faces mounting pressure to demonstrate both unity and control. If it fails to do so, it risks being seen as weak by domestic rivals and inconsistent by international observers. Therein lies the danger. The Thai military may feel compelled to escalate not because of strategic necessity, but because of political optics. Show of strength becomes doctrine. Show of strength becomes identity. This logic is not unique to Thailand. It echoes across Cambodia as well. Prime Minister Hun Manet, son of the long-serving former leader Hun Sen, is still consolidating his grip on power. His political legitimacy is built on continuity, lineage, and military background. To appear submissive to Thailand now would be to risk unraveling that narrative. Hun Manet himself is a West Point graduate, the first Cambodian leader trained in the United States. Yet his military is equipped largely with Chinese and Russian arms. This strategic alignment reflects Cambodia's deeper geopolitical posture. Over the past decade, Cambodia has tilted decisively toward Beijing. Massive Chinese investment has poured into the country's infrastructure, special economic zones, and coastal provinces. The port of Sihanoukville, in particular, has become a focal point of Chinese capital and influence. In return, Cambodia has served as a diplomatic proxy for China within ASEAN. It has blocked joint statements critical of Beijing's actions in the South China Sea. It has aligned itself with Chinese positions in regional summits, and it has hosted bilateral military exercises that exclude Western observers. In the broader Indo-Pacific rivalry, Cambodia has become a strategic node in China's push to expand influence across mainland Southeast Asia. This alignment complicates the current conflict. If Thailand perceives Cambodia as a proxy, or at least a client state, of China, then the border war is no longer purely bilateral. It begins to resemble a pressure point in the larger contest between pro-Western and pro-Beijing alignments in the region. Thailand, for its part, has long walked a tightrope between Washington and Beijing. It is a treaty ally of the United States, home to American military logistics and intelligence operations dating back to the Cold War. Yet, it is also deeply embedded in Chinese trade networks, reliant on Chinese tourism, and increasingly cautious of upsetting Beijing. This duality creates strategic ambiguity. And ambiguity, in a moment of military escalation, can become miscalculation. Already, Chinese state media has called for restraint on both sides. Beijing's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a formal statement urging dialogue, calm, and regional stability. But behind those words, the geopolitical calculus is more layered. China's interests in Cambodia are long-term and infrastructural. A prolonged conflict would disrupt investment flows, threaten security guarantees, and expose Chinese-backed projects to collateral damage. At the same time, Beijing has no interest in seeing a stronger, more assertive Thai military posture, particularly if it draws closer to Washington as a result. Thus, for China, the optimal scenario is a ceasefire that freezes the conflict without emboldening either side. For the United States, the stakes are different. Washington has remained officially silent on the fighting, choosing not to issue any direct statements beyond general appeals for peace. But analysts within the Pentagon and the State Department will be watching this closely. A regional war along the Thai-Cambodian border, especially one involving airstrikes, civilian casualties, and political collapse, risks destabilizing the Mekong subregion at a time when American strategy is focused on countering Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. The Mekong River corridor, stretching from southern China through Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam has become a new arena of strategic competition. Infrastructure loans, dam-building projects, and economic corridors backed by both Beijing and Washington are now competing for dominance along its banks. The eruption of armed conflict in this zone, therefore, is not merely a local crisis. It is a threat to the strategic balance in mainland Southeast Asia. It is also a test of the resilience of fragile states under the pressure of great power rivalry. Cambodia's economic growth has been rapid but uneven. Its reliance on Chinese capital has raised concerns about debt dependency, environmental degradation, and political capture. Thailand's growth, by contrast, has slowed in recent years, hampered by political gridlock, demographic decline, and pandemic aftershocks. Neither country is in a position to sustain a long, conventional war. Yet both are trapped by political narratives that reward escalation and punish retreat. This is the dynamic that makes the current conflict so volatile. It is not being driven by long-term strategic interests. It is being driven by short-term political survival, historical grievance, and the logic of retaliation. And retaliation, when repeated, becomes doctrine. When doctrine hardens, diplomacy collapses. And when diplomacy collapses, what remains is only force. The question now is whether either side has the political capital or the strategic clarity to pull back. De-escalation requires more than a ceasefire. It demands the reframing of national narratives, the diffusing of domestic outrage, and the acceptance of diplomatic compromise. None of these are easily achieved. And in this case, the battlefield itself resists resolution. The terrain along the Thai-Cambodian border is among the most difficult in Southeast Asia. Forested highlands, narrow trails, remote hamlets disconnected from central command, and above all, the presence of millions of landmines left from previous wars. In this geography, even a localized firefight can spiral into prolonged confrontation, simply because retreat is often not feasible and reinforcement is slow. Military logistics in such an environment are shaped not only by technology, but by terrain. Thailand's air superiority allows for rapid strikes, but holding ground remains manpower intensive. Cambodia's ground forces, though smaller and less equipped, benefit from familiarity with the terrain and a decentralized command structure more accustomed to irregular warfare. It is in these margins, these contested forested zones, where the risk of asymmetric escalation is highest. The longer troops remain deployed in close proximity, the greater the chance of accidental engagements, rogue commanders, or misinterpreted movements. And it is these small incidents, a missed signal, a patrol veering off course, an artillery shell falling 1 kilometer too far, that often determine the course of conflict. It is why the border, once opened by blood, rarely closes on diplomacy alone. There are also economic consequences unfolding in real time. Thailand and Cambodia, despite their tensions, are economically interlinked. Cross-border trade between the two countries exceeded $8 billion in the previous year. Thousands of Cambodians work in Thai factories, farms, and construction sites. Dozens of border towns rely on cross-border commerce for food, medicine, and fuel. Now, all of that is frozen. Thailand's decision to seal the entire 508-mile border is unprecedented in scale. Goods are rotting in trucks, stranded at checkpoints. Pharmacies in Cambodian border provinces report shortages of basic medical supplies. Thai businesses near the frontier are hemorrhaging income. This economic disruption, if prolonged, risks turning public opinion in both countries against their own governments. In Cambodia, rural communities are already some of the most economically vulnerable. The war threatens to tip these regions into humanitarian crisis, especially if supply routes remain cut and aid convoys are unable to pass through the demilitarized zones. In Thailand, the backlash could strike the very heart of the ruling coalition's support base. Many of the provinces bordering Cambodia have historically voted for Shinawatra-affiliated parties. If the economic toll deepens, they could swing decisively toward opposition factions, especially those promising peace and restoration of trade. This adds yet another layer to the political calculus in Bangkok. To appear too aggressive invites international condemnation and domestic resentment. To appear too passive risks losing nationalist support and military confidence. The result is paralysis, a stalemate where each side escalates, not to win, but to avoid losing political ground at home. In this sense, the war is as much about internal legitimacy as it is about external threat. And this dynamic is hardly new. Southeast Asia has long witnessed the intertwining of domestic instability and foreign conflict. From Indonesia's confrontation with Malaysia in the 1960s to Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia in 1978, to Myanmar's ongoing insurgencies spilling over into China and India, the region is no stranger to the use of external conflict as a mechanism for internal consolidation. In Cambodia's case, Hun Manet is walking a line that his father, Hun Sen, mastered for decades. Hun Sen used the specter of external enemies, Vietnam, the United Nations, even internal dissidents to justify an increasingly authoritarian grip. Hun Manet, though younger and more internationally connected, has inherited a political system that relies on centralized control, elite patronage, and the illusion of national siege. Thailand, too, is governed not just by elected officials, but by a hybrid system where the military, monarchy, and conservative elite retain ultimate veto power. For decades, every Thai government has had to navigate this reality, striking a balance between democratic appearance and autocratic structure. In moments of national crisis, it is the military that asserts primacy. And with the Shinawatra name once again at the center of power, the military establishment sees the border conflict not only as a national defense issue, but as a political reassertion of its relevance. This, again, raises the stakes. When military prestige is tied to battlefield outcomes, compromise becomes harder. And when domestic legitimacy is linked to defiance, diplomacy becomes weakness. Thus, the tragedy of the present moment is that both sides may find escalation politically safer than peace. It is this logic, not rational strategy, not national interest, that drives the momentum toward wider war. Already, we see signs of expanded militarization. Thailand has redeployed artillery units from the Lao border. It has placed surveillance drones along the Dangrek Range. Its navy has been put on alert along the eastern seaboard, not because Cambodia poses a maritime threat, but to prepare for contingency evacuations or humanitarian logistics should the land routes remain blocked. Cambodia, meanwhile, has begun mobilizing irregular militia units in border provinces. It has issued public appeals for youth enlistment and civilian readiness drills, steps that carry both symbolic and operational meaning. These moves, taken together, point not toward ceasefire, but toward a phase of consolidation and preparation. The war, it seems, is entering its second stage, one where lines harden, rhetoric intensifies, and foreign actors begin to weigh their stakes more openly. It is no longer a border conflict. It is becoming a geopolitical signal, and the world is beginning to pay attention. As the days progress, and the ceasefire remains elusive, attention has turned to what this conflict reveals about Southeast Asia's fragile architecture of peace. It is not just the absence of binding treaties or enforcement mechanisms. It is the deeper absence of shared security vision among ASEAN member states. For decades, the illusion of stability in mainland Southeast Asia was held together by a tacit agreement, one that prized economic integration over political reform and dialogue over deterrence. But when tensions flare, as they have now, the limitations of that model are exposed. There is no regional rapid reaction force. There is no joint intelligence or early warning system. There are only press conferences, closed-door summits, and diplomatic rituals that do not interrupt missile launches or funerals. And in the background, global powers watch carefully. Beijing calculates the threshold at which its interests in Cambodia may be threatened. Washington debates whether to treat this war as a regional anomaly or as a symptom of something larger. For both, the Thai-Cambodian conflict is more than just news. It is a data point in the evolving strategic competition that now defines the Indo-Pacific. For Vietnam, for Laos, even for Indonesia and the Philippines, this conflict is a warning that even the most economically integrated neighbors, with decades of cultural ties and shared borders, can descend into violence when history, politics, and identity collide. This is not a distant war. This is a mirror reflecting the unresolved legacies of colonialism, the brittle nature of political legitimacy, and the fragility of peace when it rests on silence rather than structure. The fate of the Thai-Cambodian War will not be decided by a single battle. It will not be resolved by a press release or a United Nations statement. Its resolution, if it comes, will require political courage, institutional reform, and a willingness to rewrite the narratives that make conflict honorable and compromise shameful. Until then, the forest burns, the border remains sealed, and the people, civilians on both sides, continue to pay the price of a war that no one truly wanted, yet no one is willing to stop. This is not about a temple anymore. This is about the region's ability, or inability, to prevent history from repeating itself. And so long as that remains unresolved, the next spark may be only a matter of time.